Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second of our online talks for HippFest 2022, Composing for a Movie World Tour. I'd like to start by thanking a number of institutions for making this event possible. The East Anglian Film Archive at the University of East Anglia, the Filmoteca de Catalunya, the Institute of Amateur Cinematographers, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, the University of Calgary, and the Reid School of Music at Edinburgh College of Art. So as you can see, a lot of people went into making this event happen. Thank you to everybody. My name is Alison Strauss, and I'm the director of HippFest with Falkirk Community Trust. Last year, I was contacted by Paul Frith and Keith Johnston at the University of East Anglia about their research into international amateur cinema between the wars, and in particular about their part in an international collaborative project with film archives in multiple countries to restore and showcase a package of films that toured the world in the mid-1930s, each made by winning entrants of competitions held by the Institute of Amateur Cinematographers. And as Paul described the premise of the project and the 7 films in the package, I was instantly hooked. Award-winning silent films made by pioneering and talented individuals of different nationalities and all ages, working outside the mainstream, a set of unique films that would have been seen by hundreds and thousands of people from one side of the globe to the other when they toured from country to country, but in all likelihood unseen since the Second World War. And viewing the films has been a real privilege and a delight, and I'm absolutely thrilled that HippFest audiences will be the first to see them restored up on the big screen. It gives me very great pleasure, therefore, to bring you this bonus event to the programme where we have the chance to hear directly from one of the researchers behind the project and from some of the musicians who have undertaken to create new musical accompaniment for the film package. I'd now like to invite the panel to turn on your cameras and introduce yourselves. Hello, welcome everybody, welcome. So if you could all begin by introducing yourselves and maybe musicians, to talk about which films you're working on. Who would like to go first? Maybe John, would you like to go first?
Okay, my name's John Sweeney. I've played for silent films for a number of years and worked at British Film Institute, the Cinema Museum, and played at HippFest also for a number of years. I'm working on 5 of the films. I'm going to be improvising piano accompaniment for them. The films are basically travelogue. I suppose you put them mainly in that category. One's called Transport, which is about different modes of transport all around the world. Another one is To Cairo by Air Mail, which is about a flying boat delivering mail to Cairo, and then there's lots of scenes in Cairo. A film called The Last Days of Summer, 2 little girls having a holiday on the Danube. And then there's Westminster in Winter, which is again an actuality film of scenes around Westminster. And the other film is Wonders of Nature, it's called, which is a beautiful film of just all sorts of aspects of nature.
Yeah, Moods of Nature.
Moods of Nature, that's it. Yeah.
Very moody.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, John. And maybe Chris Letcher, you could introduce yourself.
Hi, yes, Chris Letcher is my name. I'm a lecturer in screen music at the University of Edinburgh. And yes, I spoke to Alison about maybe 6 months ago about our students collaborating on some music for some films, and we decided on 2 films, 2 of the more narrative focused films, one called Sister from Japan and another one called Memotigo from Spain, from the early 30s. And yes, I'm in more of a kind of coordinating role at this stage, but our students are doing the composing. We have 18 student volunteers altogether for the two films. So we've divided students up into groups, so two groups, a group for each film, and each student's composing around a minute and a half or 2 minutes for each of the films. And then we're going to join them all together. And yes, John's very kindly agreed to perform the piano for us. And we have a clarinetist and bass clarinetist called Alex South, who's going to be performing as well, and a cellist called Pete Harvey. And two of our students are here today. This is very early days in the project for us. We still are in the process of composing, but I'm very pleased that they could join us here. And so, yeah, Theo and Luke are here. And maybe, Theo, you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. My name is Theo Vickers. I'm third year student here at the University of Edinburgh. I've been given the last 2-3 minutes of the film Sister, which is an interesting challenge because I think it sort of leaves me with setting the tone for the film, the last thing you hear. So I think...
Theo, can you tell us first a bit, just explain what the film Sister is? Just for people, because people won't have seen it yet.
Sure. So the film is about a girl in Japan whose brother has died. And essentially the film it kind of starts with her reminiscing about memories of her brother. She goes to his grave. At the same time, the scenes have cut to a field where there are boys playing with kites. And one of the boys, who's the friend of her brother who died, he's flying his kite and he gets stuck in a tree. And towards the end of the film, she happens to pass him and then helps him. And it's kind of the tone is quite sad throughout the film, but that's a moment where she's happy, she's helped him and he's happy. And then at the end, we see her walking off into the distance with her head sort of bowed. So I hope that summarizes the film.
Yeah. The spoilers aren't too troublesome. I think people will be fine with the spoilers. And Luke, so you've all been given a few minutes or 90 seconds or so each. Which bit have you been given?
So I'm working on the kite scene. So it's one of the nostalgic sort of memory parts of the film. And when I was looking at the allocated scenes for the different students, I noticed that a few scenes later, there's a rescuing kite scene. And so when I watched the film, I decided that it would be nice to speak to the person who is also composing that part and sort of get this conversation started about how we can maybe tie it together musically, as the two scenes are, two halves of this memory. So I thought it would be really cool to have some sort of musical theme motif to tie the two sections. So that is currently what I'm working on with the kite.
Brilliant. Well, can I bring Paul Frith in now to introduce your role? You're generating all of this exciting work, really.
Yes. I'm Paul Frith. I'm a senior research associate at the University of East Anglia, working on the International Amateur Cinema Between the Wars project. I have background in research and working in film archives. I've worked at the East Anglian Film Archive and the British Film Institute. And it's been over the past several years that I've really focused in on amateur film, and particularly this period of amateur film between the wars, in which we started to see the introductions of new technologies and the formations of a number of amateur film clubs throughout the world. And it's where this World Tour package was discovered, which, as Alison said, it's a great discovery. And, we're really delighted to have its premiere at HippFest in a few weeks' time.
So is there anything for you to add at this point, Paul, to give people a flavour of what to expect in the package? I mean, John's spoken broadly about the films, the travelogues, and we've heard a bit about Sister Memortigo, but maybe the context of what the package was.
Yeah, so basically, the Institute of Amateur Cinematographers were founded in 1932 as the central organising body for the amateur in Britain. And shortly after their formation, they established an international film competition, which started in 1933 and worked all the way through to the war and beyond. And it was from these competitions that the films were chosen, so these 7 films from those first 2 competitions. And they're representative, really, of the genres and the styles that were open to the amateur community. Organizations like the Institute of Amateur Cinematographers saw themselves as other than the mainstream industry. They had all of these opportunities, the creative, logistical freedoms, which the mainstream industry didn't have. So we have films like Sister and Memortigo, which we have a lot of location filming, which at the time, the mainstream industry, it wasn't as apparent, plus all the experimental works like in Memortigo. But as John said, these are coupled with travelogue films of typically people who were quite well-to-do. At the time, it was still an expensive hobby. We didn't have people, it wasn't as much of a document of British society. Often we saw international travel, and what they would often do is they would create a narrative through these holiday films, these travelogues. So throughout the amateur journals from this period, they often talked about, we don't want to see these, tiresome 30, 40 minutes documents of your holidays. They wanted these narratives to be incorporated into the films. And as John said, with films like Transports, we have all of these destinations in India and parts of the East where we have this narrative, this theme which runs through, which is all these images of public transport and ways of shipping goods around the world. So it's really about how the amateurs were using the tools that they had, but to create these films that were quite unique and very distinct from what audience would have been used to in the mainstream cinemas.
Mm-hmm. I'm really interested in the response that the students had, Chris, when you first presented them, and Theo and Luke. Did Chris just sit you down and hit you with all the films in one go, or how did you? What was your response when you first saw some of them?
So the project was presented to us at I think our first lecture at uni, and I signed up instantly because last year when I was in 3rd year, I got to write for, it's almost like a Keystone Cops sort of silent film, and I just thought it'd be a really good opportunity to try something different. Still a silent film, but a very different tone to sort of the comedic stuff in that one that I did last year. So I was on board straight away. I'm so thankful for the uni and for Chris for giving this opportunity, because it's just great, and it'll be really good to see it all come together.
Mm-hmm. And Theo, what about you? Was this your first encounter with any films like this, or silent film, amateur film?
So I've done a couple of years of composing at university, but this year is the first time I've been doing film composing, and this is the only silent film that I've composed for. But yeah, just it's really fun to be involved in a project where we have musicians to play our music and people working who understand the film as well to talk to, and just to be in part of this big collaborative project. Often the composing we do, we're recording ourselves, or we're doing it on a computer, so it's really exciting to be able to have something to be played by a real musician.
I think it's a testimony perhaps to Chris as a tutor and leader of you guys that he presented you with this task and you didn't run for the hills. So Chris, how did you start? Where do you start with your students on a project like this? How,
I've really left it. Yeah, that's a good question. I've really left it very open at this stage. We've had lots of discussions about the different roles music plays in film generally. We've talked about music and setting the scene, the time and place that the film is set in. We've talked about music and point of view and expressing interiority, characters, interior feelings, the way kind of music creates a sense of emotion in the film, sense of pace, timing, all of those things we've discussed in a kind of general sense. But then I've really left them to interpret the scenes in any way they want to. The music doesn't necessarily have to locate us in the time and place that the film's set, but it can do any kind of narrative work that they choose for it to do. Very, very open. And I'm really glad that they are communicating together, so we do get the sense of a kind of through line, because it is certainly quite unusual for there to be a number of composers working, 9 composers for each film in this case, working on one film. So the danger is that we get this real sort of patchwork kind of a score, which could be quite interesting in and of itself. But I think there are going to be these really nice kind of through lines, things that kind of return thematically as the film goes along.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question I'm really interested to know about, if Paul maybe wouldn't mind answering. I'm wondering why these films are silent films. So from the late 20s, you could obviously have synchronized sound with the film. Was sound synchronization just unavailable to kind of amateur filmmakers at the time, do you think? Which is why it was, much easier just to make films made up of images rather than image and sound.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. I would say that the amateurs remain silent. Some remain silent right through until the introduction of video technology. Many of the amateur films, like we have here at the East Anglian Film Archive on Super 8 and 8mm film, remain silent. There's a lot of discussions going on in the amateur journals throughout the 30s and 40s about applying soundtracks to their films, because it was quite a complicated process. It didn't really take off until much later. The use of intertitles and added soundtracks remained for many years beyond that point. Although what was great about the amateur community was that they were very experimental. They had a lot of freedom with what they could do with their films. So they were playing around with having accompaniment on disc, which, going back to the early days of silent cinema, they were employing techniques which had been around for years. But applying soundtracks, it did come a lot later. So we talk about the amateurs as really remaining silent for many years. So it's interesting when we talk about the silent era as being prior to 1930 in the mainstream. But for the amateurs, they stuck with it for many years afterwards. And, some people in film history, we often look at the introduction of sound as really in a negative way sometimes, because it really it reduced the experimental side of the mainstream industry, and it was becoming very one-room locations, and kind of the action and the pace of the filming was slowed down a lot. But the amateurs, they stuck with that, and we see films like Filmoteca, which are fascinating films, and they had that freedom, which I think worrying about sound would have really been a detriment to a film like that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And something else that you picked up on, you mentioned there, Chris, was something that we'd been talking about. Paul flagged up when we had a previous chat about that whole question of the degree to which you, in the sound, in the music scape, to what extent you're referencing the geographical location or the nationality of the person making the film. And it's interesting, Chris, that you say you left that very open to the students. And I'd love to hear from John how he is thinking of approaching all those many different places that are name-checked in the films. I think only one of yours is by somebody that isn't British. There's the Austrian one, but also Theo and Luke, because yours are very distinct. One is, yours is Japanese. So very interested how you've approached that. But maybe, John, you could start off And I remember you've got your piano there, so feel free if you want to express yourself with the medium of piano.
It's an interesting question, and I think there are many aspects of it. I did have to laugh when I first saw Transport, because basically it whizzes around the world. 1 minute, I mean, literally for about 10 seconds, you're in South Africa, then you might be in Java or India or whatever. So it would actually be quite ridiculous in that situation to be trying to do anything, to be following the location. I mean, possibly you can give a slight flavour in a way. In some of the other films, it's like the one where we go to Cairo, we spend quite a lot of time wandering around Cairo. I mean, it's interesting, the two films, both Transport and the Email to Cairo, certainly to me have a kind of empire sensibility. It does, I suppose, particularly the Email to Cairo, it does have a sort of British Empire sense to it in a way. And in the Cairo scenes, you see British people wandering around Cairo. I mean, you have certain bits of, there are places in some of the films where you have people playing music who are from that area, so maybe you try and reference that. But I don't think it's necessary at all. I mean, I think there are many different ways of approaching it. You can try and have some kind of flavour of the music from somewhere. I know this is a question, of course, in professional feature films as well, when you have them set in, say, Japan or China or whatever. And I can't tell a story in any kind of idiom which sounds like Japanese music or Chinese music. The question with those films is very much, but there is a story. You may create a colour at certain points to suggest a place, but there's no way that I can tell a story in that musical idiom. And it's also a slightly fake idiom. Of course, it's me on the piano sort of going... Yeah. And I mean, I can't do that for 90 minutes. It's meaningless. So normally in films, you have to find something which is more than just where the film is set. You may reference where it's set, but I don't feel that you should feel limited to some kind of music to where it's set, or indeed the time in which it's made either. That's also a question. There's no... You have to find what the heartbeat of the film and what's happening in the film, what it means, and that's not necessarily about a place.
Theo and Luke, does that chime in with your feelings when you approached the Japanese film?
Yeah, definitely, and I think especially with the instrumentation that we have, I think it would be. Yeah, at least my approach, I think I'm going to look more at the mood of the film and try and get something that connects you emotionally. And I think, and I don't know enough about Japanese music to try and do it in a style that would be kind of be Japanese. But I think, as John was saying, it's not necessarily important for the film to have that. But yeah. I think having the piano as well, unless it's being used in a non-conventional way, really lends itself to having some kind of harmony, which and sort of my background in Western classical music means I'm probably going to focus more in that aspect. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Luke, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. And for me, my approach is focusing on the story element and where we are in the story rather than the surroundings and sort of the place of which the story takes place. So I'm focusing on the kite and the idea, the story behind that, and what that carries and how it moves the plot and that sort of thing as well. And like Theo said, I'm not well versed enough in Japanese music to feel confident and comfortable at this point to be adding elements like that into the score at the moment. Maybe further down the line, but yeah, just sort of sticking with what I know at the moment.
It's wonderful, Luke, to hear about how you came at silent film accompaniment via slapstick sort of films, and then also hearing Paul talk about the massive range of genres that there were being produced by the amateur community, amateur filmmaking community. And I just was interested to hear John, I think what your considerations are when you're playing for different genres. So documentary / travelogue versus the narrative, more fictional narrative. And also Theo and Luke, why you honed in on the narrative, those, because it was interesting to me that the students you focused on, Memortigo and Sister, the ones that were very different to the others. What are the different considerations of documentary versus fiction playing? And I don't mind who jumps in.
I suppose for me, it's interesting. Luckily, with the 5 films I've got, they are very different. It's very difficult to play for a program where all the films are very much the same, but there are very, very clear differences between the films. Some like the Moods of Nature one, have a very clear structure, how they're built. Other ones like Transport seem to have much less of a structure. It feels slightly random with how it moves. And then you have things like, for example, the film of the 2 little Austrian girls. What's interesting about a film like that? One thing which I don't know if this is a personal thing for me, with so much with actuality footage from the silent era, I find I look at them and you think they're all dead now, in a way which I don't feel watching people in a fiction film. Though I suppose those 2 little girls could conceivably still be alive. It's possible, but it's very easy to get into a kind of very nostalgic sort of feeling looking at this sort of footage, and particularly with those 2 girls in the mid-30s in Austria, and you think, what happened to them in a few years' time? What happened to their lives? Where did their lives go? But in a way, I feel, it's hard for me to say, because I've looked at the films and I've played through them, but I have no idea what I'm going to do yet, and I won't actually until the day, in a way, because I'm making it up. But I sort of have thoughts about it, and I think with that film, I don't want to give it a nostalgic sense of us looking back on this sort of time. I want to give the sense of them having a great time on the last days of their holiday in the mid-30s. But that's got a very personal thing. And then you have other films, for example, like the Westminster film, which has got definitely, is the word, diegetic music. Like at the end of it, we have lots of scenes from shows in London, on music hall and shows on stage. And so there I feel the music should really, it makes sense if the music reflects what's happening on the stage. So they're all quite different, and they have different approaches. In a way, playing for documentary is harder, and in a way it's easier. It's harder because the film doesn't give you a clear thread and a clear sense of a feeling very often, but that does leave the space open for you to create a world which isn't beholden to that kind of a thread, if you see what I mean, if that makes any sense.
Luke and Theo, did you have anything to add about that experience of playing for a narrative, a more overtly narrative film? Or I wondered if it felt like you could respond to, because that's something else that Paul and I were speculating about. To what extent do you respond to the characters, for example, in the films? And
that's an interesting question. I'm not sure how I would approach a documentary differently. I think the narrative is quite important in a kind of fictional film, and I think so for example, because I'm doing the last clip of the film, is very much an ending, whereas a documentary style thing, I don't know how they're structured, but I imagine there's not really a sense of a beginning, middle, and end. There are bits and pieces from all over the place. So I think having that in mind will be really important when composing the score.
I think for myself, narrative is really important as well for me when writing for a film, just because as a writer, it helps to have something to attach yourself to and sort of try and I don't want to say like put yourself in their shoes, but everything that I write will be through my eyes, but it'll be a reflection of what's happening in the film. So I think for me, narrative would be better for me at this point than some sort of a documentary type film. So yeah.
And Paul, I'm very conscious that these films, in my head anyway, are to some extent your babies, and you're hearing the musicians talk about them. But I suppose, well, you can choose your question to answer. One is like, have you got any questions for the musicians or Chris to draw out on things that you particularly wanted to know about, like Memortigo, or I'd love to know how the films were presented with music when they toured the world, and whether they had any accompaniment.
Well, yeah, so the research that we've conducted so far, we've not been able to pinpoint any score that was accompanying these films. We do know that there was a list of suggestions and guidelines sent out by the IAC to the clubs. What was contained within? Yeah, so we're not sure what was exactly. We'd love to know. One thing to say about Memortigo is that the copy that is in existence in the Filmoteca de Catalunya, where it's a copy which came later, which does have a score accompanying it. But that was added at a later date, so we do know that the film was silent. And we do see this happen quite often. A film that was shot perhaps in the 1930s and was presented later on, a film which maintained interest throughout the decades, they would later, in retrospect, go back and add a score. Similarly to what happens now with feature silent films, new scores are commissioned. One big thing within the amateur community, certainly in Britain, was that in the amateur journals, they would talk about how to present a film show. And there's all these discussions going on about musical accompaniments. And quite often, the organizer of the event would be given carte blanche, really, to decide which discs shall we put on, to play to each of the films. And as I say, I think because of the club rooms and the small spaces they occupied, there's not really an indication that they had musical instruments accompanying the films. It was perhaps more often that they would have a disc, and it would be the choosing of the arranger of the event. But I should imagine that the world tour in some of the countries that they reached, it would be fascinating to know just what choices were made. And this is part of ongoing research that we're doing at the moment. And we'd love to know exactly what was being played at the same time.
And on that question of like the films being your babies, and is there something you'd like to ask Chris perhaps about the film that we haven't talked about quite so much, Memortigo, and the musical approach?
Well, yes. So I guess with Memortigo, it's a very different film to the others. It's a very experimental avant-garde film, clearly influenced by Soviet montage. I was just wondering what the feedback was from the students in terms of what best approaches to take, because it's very different to the other films.
Completely, yes. I haven't received, I'm listening to first drafts on Monday, so I haven't heard their responses yet. And I've really left it completely open to them to interpret in any way. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure how they're going to respond, but yeah, I think there is there is obviously a way to score a sequence like that in a way that deals with kind of the surface quality of the film, in a way the movement and the sense of rhythm in the image itself, or to kind of get under the skin of it, under the something more kind of emotive in terms of human feeling, etc. And that film is really interesting in its sort of investigation of depression and suicide, but it's kind of hopefulness and playfulness as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing how they respond.
Mhm. I suppose a follow on from that question, Chris, is what's your sense of what the students have learned by being involved in the project thus far? I think obviously the experience of performing and conducting and arranging and so forth and seeing the work live will be a big thing. But up to this point, what do you think's being learned?
I think part of it is thinking about the work music needs to do narratively, especially in the absence of any dialogue or any other kind of sound from a soundtrack. So yeah, the responsibility is very much on the composer to kind of carry all those kinds of sounds in helping to tell the story. I think that's a real skill. But yeah, all those skills around arrangement and working with live musicians, I think those are really important skills. And I'm very grateful we've got three fantastic musicians for them to work with, and I think that's an enormous learning opportunity in and of itself. And thinking about ways in which you can effectively synchronize music, which has its own kind of time, with the fixed time of a film, making sure that the points that need to be hit are hit at all, along the way at the correct time and place. All of that, I think, is tricky stuff, and really good for them to learn. So the film composer's job tends to be dealing with recorded music, so there's a lot of opportunity to get the synchronization right, kind of in a kind of post-production setting. But in the heat of a live performance, it's obviously a very different kind of a thing. So I think we're all slightly nervous of that, but also really looking forward to that. The thrill of live performance, kind of the tightrope of it all. But along those lines, I am very interested to hear how John is approaching the films he's working on in terms of any kind of the preparation is really interesting to me. Is it? I know you are looking at the films, and I'm wondering if you are kind of sketching out little bits of music that you would kind of draw on in your kind of improvised approach to the performances. And what do you do about those moments that you do feel your music needs to be quite closely synchronized with the image? How do you make sure that those musical moments arrive at the same time as the moments in the film?
I don't plan what I'm going to do, because when I have done that, what I found myself in performance is thinking, now what was it I was going to do at this particular point? And often, even if you can remember what you were going to do, what you just did beforehand doesn't lead up to it in any natural sort of way. So you have to, for me, what I do beforehand is I get to know the film as well as I possibly can. And I kind of have in my head a sound world for the film. So it's like I've got, it's not exactly material, but I've decided on a world which I'm going to inhabit in that film. And then I can practice that world away from the film. Then when I play for the film, hopefully that preparation is of some use, and that I'm comfortable in that world and I can then respond to the film. I mean, in terms of synchronization, I mean, I feel sorry for you lot, because it's so much easier improvising, in terms of actually being able to catch things, because you can just organize your life around the film. And you're not thinking, oh, I've got 4 bars more here, and I should have got to that point by now. What am I going to do? It's much easier in that sense, improvising.
I think maybe we should also just be less precious about it, and a loose kind of synchronization is often what you really want anyway. So yeah, it's interesting.
And I would like to hear, Paul, what are your hopes now for the restored program? So all this work is going on internationally with archives across the world. working on them, and we're going to be presenting them. So what's your hopes for these from here?
Well, I guess, as I said before, we're delighted that the premiere will be at HippFest. It's a great start to the year. And we have a few other festivals potentially that we're going to be screening at. One great thing about this whole project has been that not only we discovered this fascinating world tour package, but also we discovered that a lot of these films featured at other international film competitions who had their own screenings and different programs to this. So what we'd be interested in now is seeing how these films fit within other programs and other festivals, and just kind of really create a sense of that distribution and exhibition network that was being formed throughout the 1930s, to see how that international community really developed, and the discussions that were going on about the filmmakers. When a film like Filmoteca arrives in Britain for the first time, and the discussions that were happening, this fascinating avant-garde piece, this is what we should be doing in Britain. And, it's something to look towards as inspiration, really, for the amateur community. So between our project partners, in Japan, Spain, and in Italy, we're having those discussions now about, what can we do next with these films, and what do those stories tell us about those distribution networks? In terms of screenings, we are hopefully going to have a few more later this year at a few festivals. So, watch this space. But it would definitely be the research that we're still doing into these films is going to kind of determine how they'll be presented further down the line. At the moment, the package that we're presenting here is based on the research that we've conducted thus far. So, as you were saying before about the musical accompaniment, if we can find out a little bit more about that, potentially down the line, we can, do as much as we can to make it as authentic as possible. But at the moment, I'm just so pleased that we've had such great collaborators to work with for the music for these films. I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too. And I'm interested to hear from Theo and Luke. So given that the films are going to be screened in other countries from now that they've been restored, and for you, having created or worked on creating music for one of them in particular, how do you feel about that being given up to somebody else and interpreted by somebody else and performed elsewhere with their own music?
I think it's really exciting. I think as a composer, it's so writing music is so personal to you, and then it's put out there, and it's no longer really yours. It's the audience in this case, So I think it would be really interesting to hear what other composers do with the same material, because it's always going to be different. It's that it would be really interesting to see. But yeah, I think it would be really exciting.
And John, did you have anything? I mean, you've been playing music, silent film accompaniment for years, so this will happen to you all the time. But how do you feel about it? Are there films that you feel like they're yours?
No, not at all. I mean, for me, one of the great things about silent film is that it's constantly be able to be reinterpreted. And I've seen the same film with different people playing, and it's made me see completely different things in the film. One thing I find slightly weird with sound cinema, I think because I'm so used to live silent cinema, is that you go along and you're seeing exactly the same thing as someone going in a completely different city is going to see. Whereas if you go to see live theatre, it's different every night, and that's the thing I love about live music with silent film. You are either there or you weren't. It's a unique experience, and even if you've got a composed score, if it's live, it's not going to be the same exactly every night. There's always going to be an element of recreation, which I think that is something which really draws audiences in. I'm sure with HippFest, that's one of the things, is that there's an excitement for music being created on the spot there for the film, and that's going to be the only chance people will have to hear on that particular night. It's going to be a unique experience.
And I think we're going to have to sadly draw this discussion to a close, but I did want to draw out a few final words. So maybe, John, is there any words of wisdom that you want to pass on this? You've clearly got here in Theo and Luke some eager silent film accompanists in the making. Is there anything you'd like to, one thing that you could pass on?
Not really. I mean, only the things which I keep telling myself when I'm playing, which is, I think it's a tendency, particularly when you think something isn't working, is to add more and more notes in, to make it more and more complicated, and actually leaving space and having different textures and having the notes which are there, that they mean something. Because I know it's particularly when you're improvising, there's this real tendency to think, if I had more notes, some of them at least would be right. But it doesn't work like that. It's feel free. You don't have to, but feel free to leave some space and thin out the textures or whatever. But that's more, not so much for Theo and Luke. It's more just things I keep telling myself when I'm playing for a film, because they're very easy things to forget as well.
And Chris, what about you? Would you like to, because I don't know if you explained in your introduction of yourself, but you yourself are a composer for film with many, many years experience. So
yeah, no, I think John's wisdom there is really completely right, and it's something I also think about when I'm doing, composing music for sound film. It's quite easy to crowd out the drama and the story, and actually, simplifying and stripping back very often just allows more space, actually, and finding those moments where your music can be, full and intense and all of that thing. Yeah, there will certainly be moments for that, but more often than not, taking things out suddenly brings everything alive and allows the drama to breathe and the story to not feel too sort of crowded out. Yeah, and I guess there's also that thing in film music where you don't want to be coercive, constantly kind of nudging the audience, in the ribs, kind of telling them how to respond to the image. That you do want to kind of leave it open to some extent, but be a kind of a wise guide through the narrative in ways as well. So very rambly response, but I thought John's comments there were spot on.
Uh-huh. And Paul, you'd really teed up, I think, the interest at the beginning when you described the films and what this project's about. But anything you want to leave the audience with, to bear in mind about the package itself, or the significance of the IAC filmmakers? Yeah,
I think I would say that this tour took 4 years to complete, and it ended in Australia in December 1939. Just when the whole world was in chaos at that point, and they actually cut the tour short. It was planned on having screenings in Western Europe and parts of North America, but the films actually were deposited with the Australian Amateur Cine Society in 1939 in recognition of the fact that the tour couldn't continue beyond that point. But it'd been through India, Japan, Austria, Hungary, New Zealand, and the IAC estimated that 250,000 people would have seen the films by the end of the tour. Now, I don't know where they got those figures from, but they certainly did reach a lot of film clubs. So just the extent and the kind of the harmony within the amateur community at that point, for it to make its way through all of those countries and all those amateur film clubs, the sheer organization it took for those films, the same films, it's the same copies that made its way all the way to Australia, is just, so impressive. And just to reiterate something that John said there, which is this experience is unique, and we may never see these films with this score again. So, it's a fantastic opportunity to see them for the first time presented in this way, perhaps for 85 years, something like that. So, it's fantastic. And I'll look forward to hearing the scores as well, because it'll be the first time I hear them.
Oh, thank you so much. What a great point to end on. I do feel actually very sorry for people that this is HippFest at home, for people to be able to watch at home, and obviously we're hopeful that people will come to the performance, but I'm aware that some people might be tuning in. You can't manage it for whatever reason, so let's hope, Paul, there's a lot riding on you organising the global tour all over again, so it'll come to a cinema near people. That was such a fantastic conversation. I'm sorry that we have to wind it up, but I love, there's a few sort of things to take away as well. Like, I love what John said earlier about finding the heartbeat of the film. Theo and Luke, I hope that carries with you with your the work that you go on to do, and I hope you continue along your relationship of music and film. We're looking forward to seeing what you do next as well. And that idea I love of, because you're passing the baton between you in your little segments of composition of 90 seconds, and passing the baton from film to film, and hopefully passing on that joy around the world. And I don't want to sound too sort of portentous, but I'm very much conscious that I woke up today on the radio hearing news about war rumblings with Russia and Ukraine, and just feeling that this more than ever is a time to think about that positivity, about that international network of people overcoming geographical borders and sharing, and the films going around the world. So it does, yeah, it's such a shining light that films like these are around for us to share now. So just to wind up and thank you again formally, thank you to Paul Frith and Chris Letcher and Luke Hunter and Theo Vickers. I'd also like to thank Donna Jewell of Just Sign, who's been providing interpretation, and to Christina Webber for her behind the scenes production of this event, and to you, our HippFest at Home audience. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that you found these bonus elements interesting and enjoyable. So to be clear, the premiere screening of the Institute of Amateur Cinematographers Award Winners film program is with live accompaniment by John Sweeney, and with music composed by students at the Reid School of Music, will be on Thursday, the 17th of March at 4 p.m. at the Hippodrome, and it will be preceded by a panel event, a live panel event, a movie world tour, How 1930s Amateur Filmmaking Conquered the World. And that's going to be Paul Frith and his fellow researcher Keith Johnston from UEA, and Melanie Self chairing from the University of Glasgow. And as I'm sure you've gathered from hearing the little bits that Paul's been telling us about, there's a lot there to unpack and to learn of fascinating stuff about the amateur filmmaking world. So details of the rest of the programme are at hippfest.co.uk, and we look forward to seeing you in real life at the cinema if it's possible for you to attend. This has been a free talk, but if you have the means and you'd like to support us, there are a number of ways that you can donate to the festival, and you can see details of that on our website as well. Or you can, we have a thing called Pay It Forward, so you can check that out as well if you have the means. We hope to see you at our next online event, same time next week, and it'll be live this time. And that's with the nation's favourite film critic, Mark Kermode, and his fellow Dodge Brothers musician, Mike Hammond, and celebrated musician, composer and broadcaster Neil Brand, in conversation about their accompaniment for City Girl. And that's us now though, but for now, goodbye and have a good evening.